is the Jason Walker Show. Two-time National Sports Media Association Montana Sportscaster of the Year and three-time loser, the Jason Walker Show. The best local and statewide sports coverage, featuring the biggest guests from Montana.
Flint Rasmussen joining us here on the Jason Walker Show.
He's freaking exhausting, too. You used to dance a lot more. Yeah, I know, lady. I'm 51 years old now.
The NAI Hall of Famers, Mike Van Diest joined.
Don't want that up. Let's try this. Man, it feels like a Monday right now. I don't know what just happened, but we lost like everything that went down at once. All right, are we on? I think we're on. Okay. Jason Walker Show, and big show today. Still reminiscing a little bit about yesterday's show, which was so much fun with Brittany Jackson. Today is going to be a blast as well. We're going to spend most of the hour talking with Tim Brando, the legendary broadcaster, ESPN, CBS, Fox Sports. He will join us. We got some great videos to possibly show. Tomorrow, I put this in your calendar right now. Tomorrow, PBR's Chief Executive Officer, Sean Gleason, will join us. Coming up tomorrow, he's going to talk PBR, and it's back, which is great. It came back a couple of weeks, or last week in Guthrie, Oklahoma, in the Lazy E Arena, and it's back this weekend, and then next weekend. In fact, Sean Gleason has some breaking news that he will break right here on the Jason Walker Show. That is tomorrow. All right? And then, so let's see. We're on? Okay. Man. Technology, it is so good when it works, right? Just so much, yeah. Anyway, okay. So now that we got our brains back in order and our mind in the right place, we have On This Day in History coming up. We got the walk-off coming up. And like I said, Tim Brando will join us very soon, and we'll spend most of the hour talking with him. All right, so what did I start with today? We're going to start with Steve Daines, citing the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. And he's written a letter, basically, to Major League Baseball and Minor League Baseball. And he wants a new professional baseball agreement soon. He sent this letter to Major League Baseball Commissioner Rob Manfred and Minor League President Pat O'Connor and asked the sides to extend the current 30-year PBA, which is the professional baseball agreement. It expires in September. Daines is asking to extend it for 2 more years because we got to let this health crisis and pandemic and everything kind of get better. And there's no live sports at all, except for the PBR this weekend, but there's no fans. We got the UFC this weekend, no fans. We got golf starting up next month, no fans. So you see where I'm going with this. We don't know if there's going to be a minor league season. Heck, we don't know if there's going to be an American Legion season in the state of Montana. North Dakota canceled, but we're not sure about Montana. Anyway, so we're trying to, like I said, we're trying to figure out where we're going. So Daines has asked for a basically 2-year proposal, and then that gives the minor leagues and the majors 2 more years to try to figure everything out. Which is, are you going to get rid of 40 minor league baseball clubs, which includes all 8 Pioneer League teams, including the 3 in Montana? Pioneer League doesn't know if they're going to start in June. No decision's been made, but they're going to have to start making decisions very soon. Daines, as you know, had arranged for baseball representatives to come to Montana at the end of March to go to Missoula, Great Falls, and Billings to try to promote the Pioneer League and save the Pioneer League. And of course, COVID-19, everything that then happened in middle of March, everything got canceled. So hopefully there's some sort of an agreement and we can get Pioneer League this year. That's if Montana goes into phase 3, phase 2 possibly. Because phase 2 is 50 or more people, 50 or less, I'm sorry. No more than 50. How about that? Speaking of which, Governor Bullock said that starting May 15th, which is next Thursday, or next Friday rather, that gyms and theaters and museums can open. Not live theater, but movie theaters. And everybody freaking out about gyms haven't been opened yet. Gyms, you can't work out at home? Seriously? You going to the gym is that important for the last 2 months? You can't work out at home? Question mark? Seriously? There's a lot more stuff in this world to whine about than whether or not you can go to the gym. But anyway, gyms, fitness studios, movie theaters, and museums are set to reopen next Friday, the 15th. Again, social distancing requirements, lots of sanitation requirements. Pools can open up. Inside pools, like hotels, you got to have like 50% occupancy, things like that. You can go to the governor's website for more. But anyway. All right, I want to take a quick break. It feels like before we do, a couple of coaches in Whitehall now, which is pretty cool. They fill the boys and girls coaches as Mike Mulchin will take over the boys, and former Bobcat Mecklin Davis will take over the girls program at Whitehall. Congratulations to those coaches. And should be, hopefully we have a basketball season. Seriously. Hoping we have a basketball season. The Missoula Marathon was canceled today. You knew it was coming. We lost the Gov Cup. And Missoula Marathon set for the end of June was canceled. Which makes me real curious to see if that Pioneer League season starts. Will they play Pioneer League baseball with no fans in the stands? Will they play Pioneer League baseball with limits? Because if you can't have more than 50 people, Pioneer League teams' rosters are bigger than American Legion team rosters. And that's not just baseball players. That includes staff, coaches, trainers, not to mention the people up in the booth that run scoreboards. And now I get it. You don't have to have a scoreboard. You don't have to have a microphone. You don't have to have a PA announcer. You don't have to have music. But no concessions either. But if there's no fans, then no concessions. So anyway. All right, we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. And when we do, the great broadcaster, Tim Brando, will join us. He will wax poetic on COVID-19. He will talk about some of his favorite moments in sports. And will we have a football season on time? Tim Brando joins us next here on the Jason Walker Show. Don't forget to get signed up for Nitro Green. Get on the calendar for the lawn, pest, and tree needs. And take care of your yard. And let Nitro Green help you take care of your yard. They'll even mow it for you. But just do it yourself. But let them fertilize it. Let them take care of the insects. We got these supposed Asian murder hornets coming now. Like, what else is coming? Get the hornet sprayed. No ants, no spiders. Nitro Green. Give them a call. 443-5088 or nitrogreenhelena.com. Tim Brando next. Jason Walker Show. I think we might be back. I think we might be back. We're seeing. Sorry, our whole system just crashed out of nowhere. All right, you want to hear Tim Brando? Here you go.
Well, you and I were just talking about the beauty of Montana, Mr. Brando, and you've not been to either South Dakota nor Montana, but 48 other states. But these two you've not made it to. How'd you end up in North Dakota before you ended up in Montana?
A game. I want to say it was a North Dakota State game years ago.
Yep.
And made it into Idaho, Pocatello even. Not Boise's an easy one. People that's Treasure Island of Idaho, unlike any other part of that state. But you get to places like Moscow and Pocatello. That old saying when you get off the plane is not the end of the earth, but you can see it from there. I almost get that feeling. But in my travels, especially early in my career, I was doing a lot of back in those days they would have called it Division I AA. Now it would be FCS games, and I did the championship games, which were played in places like the Potato Dome in Pocatello or the Tacoma Dome, outside Tacoma, Washington. When you're doing a lot of college athletics and you've been doing it for 4 decades, the remote locations are something that becomes the norm, especially when you're doing, some of the lower level schools, which, by the way, I valued all of that. And I really have an affection, still do have an affection for watching those games, when Mount Union and Wisconsin Whitewater get together for their annual Division III national championship. I get a kick out of it, because I remember doing games like that. And I've said this many times to broadcasters, what level of play you get to do really doesn't matter as long as the passion is there. And, when you do Division III, Division II, or NAIA or FCS games, football or basketball, you can tell how the fans really care, the kids care. A lot of times you'll hear from parents and or players that you covered 25, 30 years later, and they'll talk about having an old VHS tape of your telecast and the joy it brings them on a bad day when they stick it in after they've converted it to DVD now,
Sure. Yeah.
but that's one of the great things about what we do.
Tim Brando joining us here, Jason Walker Show on the Mike Miller State Farm Hotline. So what was your early days like with travel? Because it's not luxurious like it is now, I'm sure, which, there's a lot of bus trips that I reckon were back in the day.
Oh, yeah. But I will say prior to 911, it was a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't have nearly as many regional jets that were operating. You really had more big jets flying into smaller locations. Everything changed with air travel for the worst after 911, after the towers went down. The first airline bailout. And I'll be interested to see. It's a great question because I'll be interested to see. We don't know what the new norm is going to be in the world after COVID-19. We really don't. I suspect there'll be a lot of changes, alterations to not just how we get from one place to another, but how we actually physically broadcast the games. It's no secret that sports television is hemorrhaging from revenues lost. And once the games are either played or what form they're going to be played, once it's announced that we're going to be working, and I'm still optimistic that we will, it'll be interesting to see if that changes our bosses' viewpoints on how to schedule their announcers, the kind of event that you get. I suspect that one of the things they may be looking at to save money is giving announcers games that would be closer to their homes, so they maybe could take a car service or even drive themselves from one place to from the game to their homes. And we live in various places around the country. I live in Louisiana. I live in my hometown of Shreveport. I have for 30 years, which is great if I'm doing certain games. Like, for instance, in the Big 12, I can drive to Fort Worth for TCU. I can drive to Waco for Baylor, drive to Oklahoma in Norman or Oklahoma State Stillwater. Mm-hmm. Guys like me that were raised in the South, if you can get there within 9 hours, you'd really rather drive in today's environment to just, stay away from the NTSA and to stay away from dealing with airports.
Sure.
I've got enough miles, and frankly, I don't really need to use them, nor do I want to use them. Someone says, well, you could take all those free miles and fly somewhere. The last thing a sportscaster wants to do with his free time is go to an airport.
That is true. That is absolutely true. Tim Brando joining us here, Jason Walker Show. I was going to go in chronological order here, but you mentioned this season with COVID-19. We'll just knock it out of the way. You're optimistic the season will happen. Will it start on time?
Boy, I don't know. I think anybody that tells you that it will or that it won't, anyone that speaks in absolutes now about this situation is lying to you, or they're lying to themselves. Mm-hmm. I noticed earlier today the Big Ten commissioner was on CNBC, and I really didn't hear anything riveting or new from him, but I was impressed by him in terms of all the contingencies. You could tell he was speaking from hands-on experience about what his days are like in terms of daily conference calls with his peers within his conference and talking with coaches as well as athletic directors on a daily basis. You could really see that and hear that they are going to do everything in their power to play, and they need to. I mean, the economic impact of not having college football would be devastating for not just that sport, but for all the sports, the non-revenue producing sports particularly, and Title IX sports, women's sports especially. So I do believe that they're going to exhaust every one of those contingencies to find a way to play. But it may look different, and it may sound a little bit different, and it very easily could be a little late. And by the way, if it is late by, say, a month, if we started college football the first weekend in October instead of the first weekend in September, we would end around Christmas time. The NFL is still playing regular season games. And I've always thought that that the college football season ended too quickly. The fact that it's over really feels like it's over at Thanksgiving is just too quick. Mm-hmm. I sort of think we could move everything back. I don't think a college basketball game, needs to be played certainly until after Thanksgiving. Now they're playing in early November, as you know. Yep. I think they could easily make that a one semester sport if they wanted, and start it after the first of the year. And they may have to do that this year. They may learn some things based on what's forced upon them this year that perhaps could change. And college baseball, in my mind, could be moved back a little bit. So we'll see. I am hopeful that we will see college football in some form. But, Jason, I do think that there's a very good chance that not all the institutions within the conferences may want to participate. Particularly out west, you're seeing and hearing one thing in Washington State where, they were one of the first ones hit, but yet they reached their crest and their cases started coming down a lot sooner because of the way they mitigated, which they are to be congratulated for. California is a different story, mm-hmm. and especially with the political leadership that they have, it may be very difficult for either the Los Angeles schools to participate. So if that's the case, I still believe the Pac-12, the rest of their member institutions understand the economics. They're going to want to play. And whether that means teams that choose not to play have to forfeit their games, that's for them to determine. I don't know, how each conference will have to look at that individually. But I do see a season. It could be a little bit late, might even be truncated, although I don't think they want to do that. I think the non-conference games getting in a full 12 weeks of college football matters to these schools. And I don't think the Power Five wants to throw the Group of Five under the bus. They need the Group of Five. They need them to fill out their schedules.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a very good chance that we'll play. But, gosh, to make any predictions about when or how we get through this, God only knows. I mean, I have no way of understanding. And it is
if California's not open, how do they play Montana or Montana State or some of these other schools in states that are open? You look at Long Island. Is Montana State's first game September 5th in Bozeman? Well, Long Island's pretty much in the thick of things out there in the Northeast with COVID-19. I just don't know if how a season would look if some of these teams can't play or travel, like you said.
Well, that's one of the reasons I think it's important for the administrators out there. And I'm sure, I don't know your athletic directors at 2 schools in Montana, but if I'm in charge of FCS schools, or I'm in charge of even Group of 5 schools within the FBS, and I'm an athletic director and president, I'm looking at a lot of different alternatives from a scheduling standpoint if I'm dealing with a team that has to travel from a hot spot of the coronavirus. I'm looking at potential teams that could step in and possibly replace them. Those would be sort of the contingencies I think that those schools would have to be thinking about, because and oh, by the way, that's another factor too. I'm sure they want to protect wherever they may be playing in terms of the Power 5 schools, if they have them on their schedules as money games.
Right.
And those money games that could be worth up to 7 figures in the past may only be worth half that now, because so much of that is tied to the gate of the team in question that they could be playing. That still is a lot of money. In certain cases, it might be upwards of a fourth or a fifth of your annual athletic budget.
Yep.
I mean, I've talked to a number of commissioners and athletic directors in the last few weeks, and I hear the same tune. Now, none of them want to speak publicly. They'll tell you to please keep it between us, but they're all essentially saying the same thing.
Yep.
We need to play. We're looking at every possible option. Everything's on the table. For the most part, it appears if you want to look for a date that would be considered, a drop-dead date, the Big Ten commissioner said it today. The next 6 to 8 weeks are vital, and that period would get us to right around July 15th. So I think that knowing something by the end of June is going to be important, and I think knowing by this time next month, let's say by early June, hopefully we'll have an understanding of how many more schools are open. I think that will trigger the athletic departments even more, Jason, when we start hearing, well, our schools are open. Our schools are open. There were some that were announced today.
Yep.
Tennessee, South Carolina, a lot of the schools in the South where I reside are beginning to announce. Purdue has mentioned that they're going to open. I think Oregon just a few days ago said they were going to open. So a substantial number of schools in different parts of the country have announced that they're opening. And I think that for optics' sake, they need to be able to say that. That the whole notion of schools being closed and games being played just does not look or feel good to anybody.
Is there a chance that, say, the SEC or the ACC or the big boys could hold their own seasons without having non-conference games, or schedule like Alabama Monroe, or a smaller team like in Alabama, just to fill out a 10-game schedule and go with a 9-game conference schedule? Is there a chance for that, or is college football too much money that we have to have it as close to normal as possible?
I think it's got to be close to the 12-game schedule for the gate. I mean, they require. That's one of the reasons why the NCAA, determined a few years ago that they would extend the season and allow for one extra game. The big kahunas wanted that 7th home game. Mm-hmm. You mentioned the big boys, And, Clemson, Florida State in the ACC, Ohio State, Michigan, Wisconsin, teams like that in the Big Ten, and certainly LSU, Alabama, Georgia, Auburn. These teams historically have 7 home games. Well, you're not going to get 7 home games by just playing in your conference. You got to play those non-conference games to get, that number where you need it to be. And the economic impact for a college football weekend in the cities where those colleges are located is unbelievable.
Yep.
I mean, it's in the 30, 35 to $40 million area of economic impact in cities like Baton Rouge and Auburn, Alabama, Tuscaloosa, and Birmingham. And the same would be true in and around the Clemson, Greenville areas in South Carolina, and certainly Tallahassee. So, without having that, you got a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Could you, play just your conference games? I suppose you could, but you'd be taking a physical licking by not having those non-conference games. And as I said, I believe they want to protect the interests of the smaller schools that need those non-conference games for money's sake. Where I went to school, for instance, Louisiana Monroe, formerly Northeast Louisiana University, their athletic budget, it may be, if it's not at the very bottom, it's close to the bottom of Division I college football, somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 17, shy of $20 million a year. Okay, if you took college football away and those dates that they play teams like an Auburn, a Kansas State, or an Iowa State, or a Georgia or Arkansas away from them, they would be dropping sports left and right. So I think that the administrators of all the schools want to protect their brethren at the lower levels as best they can.
Tim Brando, our guest here, Jason Walker Show. It's just crazy to me that the college landscape, I think, will change drastically if there's no football at all, obviously, but especially if there's some, just a half a season, because like you said, we're going to have to start dropping sports, and some schools eventually, I think on the smaller level, would just end up closing altogether. Financially, there's just no way a lot of these can make it, and it'll be interesting to follow. One final question on the COVID-19, Tim,
Sure.
Could you see yourself, and we've seen this during Olympics or the World Cups type stuff, could you see yourself broadcasting a game from your home while you watch it on TV? I mean, or a studio somewhere not in the city that the game's being played?
Pulling a Carl Ravitch doing Korean baseball? Is that what you're saying?
Something like that, yes.
Yeah. You never say never in our business.
Right.
You really don't. You never say never in our business. And, the show does have to go on, depending upon, and I'm sure we're all going to have to adjust and adapt. I meet every Thursday night with our crew. For the last 3 years, I've had the same producer, director. Of course, Spencer Tillman and I have been together. It'll be our 22nd year, I think, of the last 23. We were only without one another. The first year I went to Fox, and he remained at CBS, and then he joined me when his contract ended. So I've been really fortunate and blessed to have the consistent crew with me, and we meet every week and do a Zoom chat on Thursday nights, and we were talking about this. There's a lot to be determined on the broadcast end. As an example, television trucks that go with their satellites to do the games are constructed in a way where producers and directors are right on top of each other. Their elbows are touching as they're doing their jobs.
Right.
In most of those trucks, and graphics operators and the associate directors are on the second deck, and they're enclosed situation. They're packed like sardines in these trucks. Tape machines and tape recorders that are running with the help of people, multiple people side by side. They'll have to take a long look at how they want to reconstruct some of those so that there'll be at least better social distancing for those people in the workplace. And even in the booth where we're located, we may have to be a little further apart.
Mm-hmm.
How do we pull that off? You got a spotter, you got a statistician up there as well. And there's all kinds of questions that we're all asking of ourselves right now. And I'm sure my bosses, I've not spoken to them. The last thing they want to hear from, I'm sure in May, is from one of their announcers. You know, they've got a few more things to worry about. But I know they're talking to the people that they have to talk to logistically from a technical point of view about what they can do. I would assume that there may be a few more games that are done from a remote standpoint. And when I say that, I mean you might have the broadcasters of the game in the booth, but the production of the actual event would not be done from a truck on site. It could be done from a studio, which Fox, I know, has some in Charlotte. So does ESPN. Fox also has a remote unit that they can operate up out of Los Angeles. They've done that with soccer for years, you know, with the World Cup,
right?
With a so-called World Feed. I think they're also doing it this very week, with the NASCAR event that's coming up, where, you know, the talent is actually going to be in a studio in Charlotte, but the producer director might be on site, and it's really unique the way they're going about it. And maybe from a logistics standpoint, they'll figure some things out with that little test that's in front of them. But we have seen in recent years a lot of basketball games, a lot of women's sports on all the networks, especially the networks that have such inventory like Fox and FS1 and ESPN and all of their different platforms. Games that are done with no production trucks, and in some cases having the announcers, you know, in a soundproof booth at a location somewhere besides the game, where the game is located. My guess is to save money, they may do the same, or maybe do even more of that potentially. But I hope sincerely, just from a selfish point of view, and for the viewer's sake, that we don't do it everywhere, that we do it in select locations with select games, because there's nothing like being there.
Right. Yeah.
Broadcasting a live event and being in the location where the game is being played, to me, is vital to bringing the viewers exactly the story that they want to hear. And I think most sophisticated fans will know if they're getting the full treatment or not the full treatment. So, as I said, selfishly, I certainly hope that we don't do it too much, but you raise a great point, given the circumstances and the financial constraints that we all find ourselves in right now. We could see more of that this year. Absolutely.
Tim Brando, our guest here, Jason Walker Show. I got to ask you this, because I'm very intrigued as a younger announcer who's now getting up there in age, but who were some of your idols growing up? Because I, grew up listening to guys like you, or Vern Lundquist, who's so good, Keith Jackson. As play-by-play announcers, people always tease me, I don't watch a game for the game. I watch to listen to the announcers and how to get better myself. So who did you listen to growing up or watch?
Oh, my hero was Curt Gowdy, and I got to know him very, very well. The lonesome boy from Laramie, the Hall of Famer from Wyoming. And I also got to know him, and he mentored me, I'm proud to say. We became very, very close friends. I talked to him, 5 or 6 times a year. And I'm talking from my earliest stages. I was working at a local radio station in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, 40 years ago in 1979 and 80. And the owner of the station, who also ran the station, was a really gregarious, outgoing gentleman who was had gone to Hollywood, a big theatrical guy. And he saw something in me and loved, my passion for sports. And he allowed me to have the first ever nightly sports talk show in Baton Rouge, which was something I really wanted. And I also was able to sell him on the idea of doing high school football games every Friday. So, I'm 22, 23 years old at the time. And he said, "Kid, if you can sell it, we'll put it on." I said, "Well, that's not a problem." So I went out there and did it. And I had my cassette tapes, and he knew that I had lofty goals. And he actually took cassette tapes of mine. He was a part of an independent group. Back in those days, we didn't have Clear Channel
Right.
or other conglomerates like Clear Channel, Cumulus, and such owning all the stations, or an iHeartRadio type of thing. It wasn't like that. The radio in those days, it largely was home owned. We used to call them mom and pop operations.
Yep.
And Mr. Earl owned this AM station. It was the hottest AM top 40 station there, and he wanted to turn it into news talk and sports. And I was just there at the right time to be able to do that. I did a shift for 3 hours in the afternoons that was basically in the beginning spinning records and being a disc jockey, and would later become a talk show format in the afternoons. But at night, after I got done with my 3-hour shift, I did a nightly sports talk show, which was something that I sold and I put together. And I also sold him on having a high school football game of the week. An AM station that was probably about, I think we were shooting out about maybe 10,000 watts during the day, went down to 1,000 watts at night, when the sun went down.
Oh, yeah, night power.
And, so anything that we did at night, he thought was found money, which it was. And I produced it, broadcasted it, and won a state award over some university broadcasts of LSU, Tulane, Louisiana Tech. Won the state Louisiana Association of Broadcasters Best Play-by-Play Award. This was in 1980, and I was so thrilled. And he said, "I'm gonna play. I want to take your tape to my owners meeting. We have an independent ownership group that meets in West Palm Beach, and West Palm, Kurt owned a number of stations, and he had them in Massachusetts, he had them in Wyoming, and he had them in Florida, West Palm, where he lived. And he took my tapes and played them for Mr. Gowdy. And
Wow.
and in 1982, as luck would have it, I had moved on to New Orleans. I was doing a nightly talk show on WGSO in New Orleans, and Kurt was still doing the old Sunday show called The American Sportsman on ABC. But he was coming into New Orleans to do the Final Four with Kaywood Ledford, the legendary Kentucky play-by-play announcer, the one that Jordan won at the buzzer in 1982 at the Dome. And the people from we were an affiliate of ABC Radio, and ABC called our station and asked if we'd be interested in having Kurt Gowdy as a guest on our show.
Oh.
And I'm like, what? Really? And I said, you bet. You bring him over. He came in, and he right away knew me because my old boss was a friend of his, Bob Earl. He said, "Kid, I've heard your stuff. You're good." And so that got me off to a great start. And by the end of the day, I told him I'd named my little brother. I have a little brother, Kurt, who sadly passed away back in early March, 52 years old, and a great journalist he was. And he was living in Hong Kong, and he died. He had cancer and couldn't make it. But he was only 11 years old at this time. And I was telling Mr. Gowdy, hey, we have a Catholic family, and it was an oh, by the way child. And my mom and dad said, hey, if it's a girl, my big sister got to name the baby. And if it was a little boy, I got to name the baby. So I was an 11-year, at that time I would have been about 12 years old when Kurt was born. And I was telling Mr. Gowdy about this. And I think he thought I was conning him. That was really like, yeah, this can't be real. You're telling me you named your little brother after me? I said, sir, if you don't mind, I'd really love this. Would you mind talking to your namesake? I'm going to get him on the phone with you.
Oh, man.
Well, he teared up. Mr. Gowdy teared up when I told him this, and I got him on the phone with my little brother. My little brother thought it was cool too, really did. And when he got off the phone, he turned to me, and we'd already done the hour-long interview. And he said, kid, he said, tomorrow, which was Saturday, this was on a Friday. He said, tomorrow morning, I want you to come to the Hyatt Regency. I'm taking you to breakfast. Now, you're going to have to come early because I've got to be over at the arena for the first semifinal game. We had about a 3.5-hour breakfast at the Hyatt Regency,
Wow.
Jason. I will never forget. And we established a long, long relationship from that time on until the time he passed away. And all the years that I started going to the Final Fours, which was in that period, he was hosting and emceeing a lot of champions dinners for the NABC at the Final Fours, because he was a Hall of Famer himself as a player. And we would always have breakfast on the Saturday morning of the semifinals. We did that for about, 12 or 13 straight years until he got too old to make the trip. So that was a true hero for me.
Man.
And several others I looked up to. Loved Jack Buck, Ray Scott, Jim Simpson, who worked with Kurt, I later worked with in my earliest days at ESPN, were all guys that were truly mentors and very helpful to me in my career. I always thought the world of them. Lindsey Nelson was a great one, who was in Knoxville, Tennessee. I actually am a recipient of the Lindsey Nelson Award back in 2014, which I'm really very, very proud of. We're all influential people, and that's one of the reasons why I always take time when situations like the one today with you pop up, and with others that are much younger than you. I think it's important that we always help the next generation, because those guys were making the move from radio to TV, and they had to make major adjustments in the way they did it. And even though there wasn't a manual or a book on how to do it, you could just watch them and learn how to do it. You know, they really had to live it and make the changes that were necessary moving from radio to TV. And my generation, the baby boomer generation, could pick up on that and hopefully take it to the next level. So, yeah, those were, and I'm big on those kinds of influences, and I write about it often. If you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, you know how much, not just the history of sports, but the history of broadcasting sports means to me.
Oh, absolutely. And you're a great follow on Twitter as Fox Sports' Tim Brando, our guest here, Jason Walker Show. I could keep asking questions. I don't want to take too much of your time, but what would you tell a younger broadcaster that's getting into the industry right now, because we don't know where the industry's headed?
Well, it is going to be tougher. You know, so part of what we were discussing earlier, potentially about, you know, where we have to broadcast games from, you know, this notion that maybe you don't always have to be on site. That's a problem, I think, for younger broadcasters, because you want to establish relationships with the people you're covering, the coaches, the players. And I think to win the audience over, they need to know how much you really do know and how close you are to the coaches and the players that you're covering is how you win influence with your viewers. They trust you. And more now, there are a lot more jobs, a lot more games on TV, but we're not always doing them with the same amount of tools. And that can be difficult. I think that there is absolutely the amount of time you spend to prepare has never been more paramount. Mm-hmm. So preparation, is absolutely an even greater force for the next generation of sportscasters than it was for us, especially given the potential roadblocks that lie ahead with regard to, the physical makeup of how a broadcast is done in this day and time. I think it's also important, and I tell the young people this all the time, take every job you can get your hands on. Repetition means everything. I was very fortunate to start as a child because of the good luck I had in having a father that was in the business. And I grew up on a television station, basically, and he was an entertainer as well as a broadcaster. And started working games when I was 14 years old and quit football to do that in the 9th grade. Not many people get that much of a head start. So when you do get a chance to get on the air, no matter the level of game you're broadcasting, do it, okay? It could be the lowest classification of high school lacrosse. Go out and do it. Get the reps. And that's one of the good things out there for young people today is whether it's through the Big Ten Network or the ACC Network or the Pac-12 Network, a lot of these games, especially for kids that are dreaming about being in sports television, might be in school and young, they get an opportunity now to actually show what they can do and have the games or the kind of inventory that's available for them to take advantage of to get on. But take every opportunity that presents itself to you, and become. And the reason I say that is because it takes a while for any young broadcaster to become comfortable with themselves on the air. It's one thing to know how to do it, to keep up with the names and the players and the rules and the glossary of the sports you're covering. But broadcasting automatically pumps adrenaline into your veins and can raise the octave of your voice and bring a level of energy that's not necessarily natural. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, you got to grow comfortable in your own skin and understand that just being who you are is all that matters. I see a lot of broadcasters today doing poor imitations of other broadcasters, and that's not good. You want to be who you are, not some homogenized version of who you want to emulate. Right. That takes, I think, time and comfort from being on the air and getting as many reps as humanly possible. And by the way, it may not be a sports job to start. It may be a disc jockey's job. It might be doing the traffic or the weather. God only knows what your first broadcasting opportunity may be, but take it. Yep. The hands-on experience is always going to matter. And that's whether you're in school or not in school. I really mean that. But particularly now, I say often it's about, the 3 Ps, preparation, performance, and priority. Your priority must be that you prepare and you perform, and understand that the performance level is going to be enhanced by the way you prepare. And there's no substitute for that. So those are things to keep in mind as you move forward as a young broadcaster.
Couple final questions for you. Favorite game you've ever called?
Oh, wow. I love football and basketball equally. I think more people have, especially in your part of the country, have seen me do basketball because of the years of the NCAA tournament. Yep. And in 1998, I think was a dream year for me. I was escalating. My career was escalating at CBS. I just started hosting college football on CBS at that time. I'd been doing games for them and doing the NCAA tournament in 96 and 97. But in 1998, I was paired with the great Al McGuire, who had worked with Dick Enberg and Billy Packer for so many years on NBC. And that's another guy I really looked up to a lot. You mentioned Vern Lundquist. Vern, because I got to work with him, my admiration for him is through the roof. He was never really a number one guy at a network. And in fact, when he was doing the SEC on CBS, it was because he got demoted from the NFL number 2 game for Dick Enberg, when Enberg came to spend the twilight of his career at CBS after having been at NBC all those years. When I got to work with Al, I'd already worked some with Billy Packer. I'd already started my career with Vitale at ESPN. It was a thrill and a great lesson in life to be with Al. He's a national treasure. Yeah. And I did learn a lot about life from a guy that truly was basketball's original flower child. He thought about things that nobody else ever thought about and made you think as a result. And we had a game between Stanford and Rhode Island. The winner was going to the Final Four, so it was a regional final. And you can go back and look it up. Stanford came from 6 down with under a minute to play to beat Rhode Island on a steal by Arthur Lee and a slam dunk and one for Mark Mad Dog Madsen to help put the game away. And a few minutes after that game ended, we're out there and I'm watching Al dancing with the Stanford tree while interviewing players. It was, I'm sure I've had greater games. I know I've had buzzer-beating games involving Michigan State, involving the Butler Did It Again, and countless others through my years of college basketball. But it was just such a dream to be with Al, doing a game where a team was punching its ticket to the Final Four in San Antonio. That one stands out, but it stands out more because of who I was with and where I was at that time in my career. You know, I'm 42 years old, I think, at that point, and I was so thrilled to be next to him. And I felt like, gosh, after working with Al, there's no one. You know, I've worked with Raft, I've worked with Vitale, I've worked with, you know, you name that guy. But McGwire was in the very end of his career, and if I hadn't been with him then, I probably would have never had a chance to work with him. So that was really, really a thrill. In football, there have been many, many incredible moments, and every time we go on the air, whether it's at the Big House in Michigan, or they're jumping around to start the fourth quarter at Camp Randall in Wisconsin, or I saw LSU go 90 yards in less than 50 seconds to beat Arkansas the day after Thanksgiving of 2013. Those are unbelievable moments that you sort of pinch yourself and say, I can't believe I was there getting to call that game at that location. But as far as just the best broadcast situation and most memorable, it would have to be that regional final in St. Louis with Al McGuire in 1998.
That's fantastic. You've worked with some great color analysts over the years. Besides Coach McGuire, who else stands out for you?
Oh, Raftery is the best of the best now.
Yeah.
You know, Bill is 77 years old. He sounds and looks and acts the same way he did when he was 47. And I was starting out at ESPN. You know, I've followed Bill from ESPN to CBS to Fox. You know, we've been doing games together for, like I said, going into our fourth decade. He just makes everybody around him better. You can make a case if you took just the best of Al, the best of Billy Packer. I don't think there's, and the enthusiasm, okay, of a Vitale. If you took the three best things about those three guys, okay, the refreshing irreverence of an Al McGuire, the just unstoppable enthusiasm of a Vitale, and the incredible eye for something that no one else sees but you do of a Billy Packer. Put all three of those together and you got Bill Raftery. It's like a pilot having to, when you think about a pilot at 30,000 feet, if he suddenly has to take control of the plane himself while calling a game, sometimes announcers, play-by-play guys feel that way. Mm-hmm. But when you're with Raft, it's like cruise control from start to finish. He makes everyone around him better. And I don't know that you'd like to think, and I've always felt like that's my role. My role is to try to make everybody on the broadcast better. The sideline reporter, the producer, the director. You want to be the guy that brings the show on the air and takes the show off the air. You want to be the guy that is the difference maker in terms of making everyone else around him better. When you're with Bill, you can't do that because he's already done it.
Wow, that says a lot. I love listening to him, by the way. Are the stories about some of these older analysts and play-by-play guys of the late nights, the all-nighters, are all these stories true?
A lot of them. I mean, a lot of them, simpler times, back in the 80s and early 90s, when most of us are great storytellers, and when the game ends, you've got so much adrenaline flowing through your body, you can't get right to sleep.
Right.
So you go back to the hotel lobby bar and you have a couple, and before we had phones in our hands where you could take pictures and they could be sent out all over the country, no one had to worry about what was being said or even done, from time to time. So some of those stories are true. Not all. I'm sure not all of them are, but yeah, I think especially those of us that grew up in the 80s. I know when I went to Connecticut, moved in there in 1980, late 86, and we started College Game Day in 87. Those were simpler times. I mean, they were. And we were all young. We all worked really hard. I mean, really hard. in what is a pressure-packed and competitive business. So if you worked hard, you also wanted to play hard. You wanted to enjoy some of what you had done. Like, man, did we just do that? And so if you felt good about your show, you certainly wanted to talk about it afterwards with the people you worked with. So, yeah, that's where a lot of those stories are emanating from, and always will. And it's politically correct times, which began, I think, right around the early 90s, around the Anita Hill, Clarence Thomas congressional gathering. And I think that changed a lot of people's minds about the way they needed to conduct themselves, whether in the workplace, in the studio, or even on the road. But listen, if you don't have a little bit of fun while you're doing this job, you're missing out. And I do think in most cases, it's all about building relationships. If you spend time, your downtime with the people you're working with, it's only going to make you sound as though you're really enjoying being with one another when you're on the air.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to say that I've never worked with anybody that I wasn't also a friend with. And you do establish great relationships. And those relationships aren't just about the time spent on the air. It's about the incredible, kind of relationship you build when you're off the air too.
Yep. 9-hour drives one way to do a football game in Eastern Oregon, or, somewhere in nowhere, Oregon or Idaho is that's fun.
Oh yeah. Well, just a few years ago, in the midst of one of those incredible blizzards that was hitting the Midwest, Raft and I did a game at Butler in Indianapolis, and we had to get to Iowa City, and there was just an awful storm, and we were stuck in Chicago for about 7 hours together at the Admirals Club. Now, granted, there's worse places to be stuck in the Admirals Club in Chicago, but at least we were with one another and we could visit, and those stories that you share sometimes are, you develop a bunker mentality because you're on the road and you got to get from one place to the next. Now, the game wasn't until the following day, but, those kind of travel situations that you face, and there's been many where you had to drive,
Yep.
And you were going maybe 15 miles an hour down an interstate from, someplace like Bloomington or South Bend, hoping you could get to O'Hare to reach your flight. So moments like that you'll always remember, and it's good to know that you are doing it with friends.
Well, I will never forget this moment chatting with you for the last hour. It's been a blast. Appreciate your time, and hopefully someday I can, call a game with you. That would be that'd
be fun, and
awesome.
I hope someday to get to Montana to meet you.
Well, you know what? That would be great, and because you've got 2 states to knock off. You do what Dr. Ian Smith did. Dr. Ian Smith flew into South Dakota. He drove into Montana to knock out 2 states there. You do it all at once right there.
Beautiful. Check on the Grizzlies and the Jackrabbits, right?
Yeah.
Do a little homework.
Yeah, and well, I'm a Bobcat guy, so I can't root for the Grizzlies.
You're a Bobcat guy. I got you. Okay.
But
well, it was a pleasure chatting with you. I really enjoyed it.
So that was my interview with Tim Brando. That was fun. Appreciate you guys sticking with us through the technical difficulties. We'll put the whole interview up in its entirety after the show, after we get done. So if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or listening on Podbean, Network One Sports, Treasure State Radio, wherever, JasonWalkerShow.com, also on YouTube and or on Facebook and Twitter. We'll have the whole interview with Tim Brando. What a great time. Tomorrow, Sean Gleason, Chief Executive Officer of the PBR, will join us. So we will have that tomorrow as well. And lots of great stuff coming up tomorrow as we wrap up the week. Merrick at the Movies back next week, or tomorrow as well. All right, let's do On This Day in History. It is brought to you by the Motherlode Sports Bar, Casino, and Restaurant. It is May the 7th. It is my buddy Dave's birthday. It is my buddy Zach's birthday. And I believe it is my niece's birthday today. Aria. I think she's 6 days younger than Winnie. So my brother and I we didn't. We each had babies, though, like 6 days apart 2 years ago. So I think today is Aria's birthday. Okay. It is National Day of Reason. I don't know. World Password Day. Which password? Send them to me. National Roast the Leg of Lamb Day. 1951, International Olympic Committee allowed Russia to participate in the 1952 Olympics. 1957, Indians pitcher Herb Score hit in the head with a line drive off the bat of Gil McDougald. Now, Herb Score has an interesting story. When he was a kid, he was run over by a truck when he was 3 years old, and then later had rheumatic fever. And then he pitched 6 no-hitters in one season in high school. And then, of course, he got hit in the head, almost lost his eyesight, was never really quite the same pitcher. And then in 1998, long after he retired, he'd been inducted into the Broadcasters Hall of Fame the night before and was hit by a semi-truck. And he suffered massive brain, chest, and lung injuries. And the orbital bone around one of his eyes was fractured and 3 ribs in his sternum. And then he lived another 10 years. I mean, Herb Score had quite the history. On this date in 1977 at the 103rd Kentucky Derby, Seattle Slew would win in 202.2. In 1983, August Hoffman performed a record 29,051 consecutive sit-ups. So this is my point. We were talking about this way back at the beginning of the show. May 15th, gyms and stuff can open up. And people have been whining the last 2 months. Why can't my gym be open? Why can't I work out? You can't work out at home? Question mark. This guy performed over 29,050 consecutive sit-ups. You can work out at home. Happy birthdays, Johnny Unitas, born on this date in 1933. A couple of Montana birth dates today. 1901. Any guesses? An actor, born in Helena, graduated from Gallatin High School. Gary Cooper was born on this date in 1901. Robbie Knievel was born in Butte on this date in 1962. By the way, Gary Cooper, born in Helena. Happy birthday to Purdue standout Katie Douglas, born on this date in 1979. Met her in 2000 in Thanksgiving weekend in Cancun during a basketball tournament. Great player. Seattle Slew passed away, by the way, after won a race, the Derby, on this date in 1977. Seattle Slew died on this date in 2002. Was 18 years old. So there you go. All right, let's do this.
We're almost at the end of the show. What did we learn? And what did he miss? Time for the walk-off.
We learned a lot. We learned technology is great when it works. Apologize for the technical difficulty at the show, but thanks for sticking with us with Tim Brando. Tomorrow, coming up, PBR Chief Executive Officer Sean Gleason. The PBR is going to buck this weekend in Guthrie, Oklahoma at the Lazy E Arena this weekend and next weekend, and Sean Gleason will join us. I'm going to ask him, because they're doing testing on everybody down there, how did they get the tests, and what do they say to people who say, well, how do you get the test? Sean Gleason will answer that tomorrow. Also, we'll wrap up the week, Merrick at the movies, and a whole lot more. Thanks for joining us. The whole Tim Brando interview back up on JasonWalkerShow.com and Facebook and Twitter coming up here shortly. We'll see you tomorrow. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Oh, yeah, we're going to leave you with this, because this was a great moment in New York Mets history. On this date, 4 years ago? Bartolo Colon, the pitcher.
Colon looking for his first hit of the year. Oh. He drives one, deep left field. Back goes Upton, back near the wall. It's out of here! Bartolo has done it! The impossible has happened! The team vacates the dugout as Bartolo takes the long trot, his first career home run. And there will be nobody in the dugout to greet him. This is one of the great moments in the history of baseball. Bartolo Colon has gone deep.
The Jason Walker Show is produced by the Jason Walker Media Company. Any reuse, rebroadcast, or retransmission without the express written consent of the Jason Walker Show is strictly prohibited. Just listen, watch, and enjoy.